Hello and welcome to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I'm joined first of all by Tom McMahon.
Hello.
And I'm also joined by James Hoyle.
Hello, thanks for having us.
No, thank you very much for coming on, guys. I wish that we were speaking under better circumstances. Today's recording is not going to be joyful for either of you, I can imagine. We're going to be talking about all of the issues that have been surrounding Morecambe FC recently and the real threat that the club is facing of going out of existence. It's a threat that's been hanging over the club for, seriously, probably a number of months now, but this really stretches back a few years. And we're going to be talking about all the things that have been surrounding Morecambe, particularly with this sort of rogue owner/director that's in place.
Yeah, it's Jason Whittingham, and then there's Colin Goldring as well. They own Bond Group, who are an investment company. They previously owned Worcester Warriors, who had multiple issues regarding funding, and they were the reason that Worcester ended up out of the Premiership and out of rugby in general. They've managed to make a comeback in recent years, which is nice to see. I think they're going back into the second division of English rugby. But yeah, Jason Whittingham and Colin Goldring are the two current owners of Morecambe.
Okay, well that's good context, and I think we're going to jump into that all in a second, but really with these recordings and with these episodes that normally centre around clubs, we normally go over a bit of the club history, the club culture and the club identity, and we're going to do that kind of briefly at the start today, but really the reason that we are here today is for Tom and James to get quite a lot off of their chests, as we were talking about off air, but also to, I suppose, raise a bit more awareness about the issues that are actually going on, because when we're looking at all these things come out in social media, it's quite easy to get caught up in the frenzy and the whirlwind of all these different rumours and all these different opinions coming out. So, I'm not saying that we have a huge platform or anything, but I'm hoping that for you guys, it's a chance to vent a little bit, but also to kind of lay out exactly what it is going on so that people are aware of the issues and, they actually want to help you guys try and fight it as well, because this has been an issue that's plagued English football for a number of years now. We look at Bury, we look at Reading, we look at a number of other clubs who have gone through this. Reading have thankfully managed to get their way out. Sheffield Wednesday going through similar. But it's always a little bit worse when your club is a little bit lower down the leagues because less people seem to care and there's less limelight on it. So hopefully this gives a chance for people to understand what's going on at Morecambe, the issues surrounding it, and how they can actually help you guys out as well. But just before we kick things off properly, Tom, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Tom. I've been watching Morecambe for as long as I can remember. I was going down strapped into my dad's chest in one of the baby holders at the old ground in Christie Park. One of them, it's kind of been the one consistent throughout my life. I had a season ticket for a few occasions. That's my kind of history with Morecambe.
That's a good history, and this is why we wanted you on the show, because you're a fan. Obviously, Morecambe is an intrinsic part of your life and it always has been, and I think that really drives home how hard it is to deal with what's been going on at the moment. James, what about yourself? Tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Yeah, it's a very similar story, really. You sort of grow up watching Match of the Day and everything like that, and then you sort of say to your dad, well, actually, what's the local club here? Can we actually go along? And it got to about the age of 8 or 9 when finally he took me along to one of the first season of the new stadium. It was a friendly against Blackburn, and ever since then we've had season tickets. I've got an account on social media called Morecambe FC Feed, which we sort of hope to just get people's opinions on, update people with information, and I hope people have found that sort of informative within the fan base recently, because it's such a traumatic and ever-evolving situation that it's sort of been able to update people on via that Twitter account. And I sort of founded it because probably 2017, 2018 time, Morecambe is a small club as EFL standards go. There wasn't much social media presence, even on the official channels. So yeah, since then we've had a lot of things going on, a lot of people doing analysis work, and just delighted to be a Morecambe fan most of the time. But recently it's been very difficult.
Exactly. And the thing is though, pages like yours, Morecambe FC Feed, it's a lot of people look at social media and they look at the followers and stuff like that, but it's the followers aren't the point, it's the community that you build is the point. And if you have a community for you and your fan base, you get analysts on and things like that, that's ultimately what you want to do. And it's having that community that can actually make it really important in situations like this. For a bit of context on Morecambe, you guys have been going to Morecambe your entire lives, so you'll be able to tell me a little bit more about the history of the club. But for the most part, have been a pretty staple EFL club. If you go back far enough, it was the Lancashire combination, I think, and then the Northern Premier League. But as far as I've been watching football, Morecambe have always been there or thereabouts in the EFL at the very least.
Yeah, we've kind of consistently been in League Two, really. It tends to be around the bottom half, but well, since we got promoted from the conference at the time, we've always been in League Two. A lot of the time we were scraping by, but we were always there. We were always a consistent. We did actually go up to League One for 2 seasons.
Yeah, that was with Derek Adams,
It
wasn't
was. As a Scotsman,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what your thoughts are on Derek, but
We can probably talk about that off air. I have a lot of thoughts on Derek
I
Adams.
personally love the man. Even some Morecambe fans don't like him. But yeah, we've been a consistent in the Football League for best part of 20 years now. So never really stepping out of our lane, I'd like to say as well. We know what we are, we know where we are, and we know what the club's about. It's not about having 20,000. I mean, the stadium wouldn't even hold that, but it's a small community club that's just been in the bottom half of League Two for however long, and that's just how we've been.
Yeah, and you're spot on for saying we sort of know where we are as well. I know you did a podcast with an Edinburgh City fan, and that sort of centred around them not really knowing their place or not being able to be stable. Like, we were founded in 1920. We had basically half a century in the Combination League, the Lancashire Combination League. We were fairly dominant in the 60s in that, so we got put into the newly founded Northern Premier League, where we stayed for another 3 decades until we made it into the National League, where we stayed another 12 years before we made it into the EFL. It's been a very slow rise, and until our relegation in 2023 from League One, we got promoted in 2021 during COVID for that. Until that relegation, we had never been relegated. We'd got basically one proper promotion. The other two were sort of on technicalities of league structures. So yeah, we very much do know our place. And to see all the sort of turmoil in the last 10 or 15 years, I'd say, it's so uncharacteristic of the history of the club.
I think that's fair enough as well. In fact, I think it's a really good point. Mentioned a few times on episodes that we've recorded this year that there's a lot to be said for football clubs that do know their place within like a pyramid setup or a league setup. It's not always about chasing trophies. I know that obviously a huge element of football is winning, don't get me wrong, but you know, if we look past that and we look at, as I said earlier, the communities that football clubs create, the types of culture that are around it, the fact that you support your local, that's what you do, that's who you are, and this is what the club is. The rest is a bit of a bonus in many ways. And I think there is a lot to be said for that. I think there's a lot to be said for the different cultures and the different communities that actually revolve around that type of scene and idea as well. And I think it's really important for a club at Morecambe's level that it remains stable. But like you said there, James, this is just so uncharacteristic of the club. I mean, apart from maybe like a few close shaves here and there, the club's never really had any financial difficulties or administrative problems coming up to this. Like, it's all maybe not so much come out of the blue, but it's very much against the run of play that this would happen to Morecambe, I think would be fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. Ever since we sort of moved to the new stadium, it's kind of been slowly unravelling. And I suppose the directors, who are massive Morecambe fans, they've had to put funding in at some points to keep us going. But as each season goes by, as Tom said, especially like sort of 2016, 2018 times, we were getting to the point where we were no longer bottom end of mid-table. We were sort of scrapping around at the bottom. But we'd never been relegated. We were the only professional side in England to have never been relegated. And we sort of just thought that would never happen to us. And then, of course, you get to League One. And as you said as well, we knew our place. When we were going away to Sheffield Wednesday, away to Sunderland, away to Derby, the result was obviously not great when you lose 5-0 away at Derby and things like that. But in the middle of winter. But we knew our place. Like, we enjoyed the days out. And yeah, unfortunately, we've sort of succumbed to a very slow-burning ownership issue that we've had since Bond Group took over.
Yeah, so let's jump into that, I suppose, because I think it's important that we get the context of this as well, because as much as we say it's against the run of play and somewhat out of the blue, the issues have kind of been simmering for a while and are now well past boiling point. When did the current ownership group arrive, and what was the sort of context of them coming in?
So they arrived in 2018. They had, according to their own public statements they've put out and media interviews, apparently they put funding into the club in 2017. And a very short, there's a lot going on, but I think the key thing to mention is that we moved stadium in 2010 from, as Tom mentioned, the old stadium at Christie Park to the as was Globe Arena, which is now Mazuma Stadium for sponsorship. At that time, when you're moving stadium, if you're going to pick a time in probably in the entire 21st century to move stadium and buy steel, you probably wouldn't do it in 2008 with the financial crisis.
No, you would not.
That's exactly what was going on. So we struggled with steel costs. We struggled with trying to get the plans for the stadium redone and get hospitality things done and concrete reset. We got apparently £10 million from Sainsbury's for the old ground. And the Sainsbury's is still there, flourishing, where the old ground is. But yeah, it was meant to be a great financial boost for the club and then chairman Peter McGuigan. And with the various issues that happened, some self-inflicted, some external, sort of out of our control, we've just slumped ever since. And it ended up being sold in 2016 to a Brazilian quote-unquote businessman who was based in the Middle East called Diego Lemos, who very quickly went AWOL, and we were back with no money, struggling to pay wages. There was a great picture where the players were on an away day trip and they posed in front of a pub called The Volunteers, having not been paid for that month yet. So that sort of shows the point we're in. But yeah, we managed to survive relegation in those seasons, stay in League Two, and then Bond Group took over. And yeah, here we are. They basically admitted during COVID that they were buying the club to flip it on. When they had lent money in 2017, it was very much about, the club was at rock bottom. They could turn it around, make it into a sustainable club and sell it for profit. And Kieran Maguire, the football finance expert, he always talks about the 4 reasons to buy a football club: profit, vanity, insanity, and love. I think it was buying Bond Group and Jason Whittingham, Colin Goldring, buying the football club was definitely, they tried to make profit, but it was just founded in insanity.
Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. And I mean, Tom, for you and James and for all your fellow supporters, seeing all this carnage going on behind the scenes, like, let's be completely honest, it's a bit scary when a new owner comes in and almost immediately goes AWOL and sells the club back to previous investors. It must have been quite worrying for you and everyone else to see.
Yeah, so when Lemos took over, we were in the period of where we were kind of the bottom half of League Two towards the relegation zone. It was that unknown that at the same time it was kind of, everyone was excited because why would a Brazilian businessman be buying a little club in the Northwest? Is he going to pump lots of money in? Is he going to provide us with what we've wanted this whole time? Even things like stadium development, going back to what we were saying before with we were promised this, that and the other, the actual plans for the stadium we have, it's nothing compared to what it was meant to be. We have technically 4 stands now, but it's kind of 3 and a bit, whereas the actual design, it was meant to be like a 4-sided proper stadium, but there was kind of thoughts when Lemos came in that we'd actually finally get that proper 4th stand, but we never did. And like James said, he just vanished off the face of the earth. I think that when it got sold back, it was almost forced, and I think the then owners kind of felt like they had to do it because they were the ones responsible for selling it to Lemos. But it was never really explained why he left. Even now, we're still kind of unknown, and all we can see from him, because he has no online presence, is that his company house says that he lives in Qatar.
Yeah, there's a few red flags, and then obviously Bond Group take back over. And I suppose, I mean, for me, if someone was to buy a football club and they said it was with the intention of flipping it, that to me is an immediate red flag, because football clubs rarely, if ever, make profit. It's quite rare, especially in the sense of being able to flip it. You can't necessarily flip a football club like you can a house. They work in completely different ways. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, that must have sounded quite scary as well, because presumably that would mean funneling a whole lot of money into the club for the owners to then sell for a profit and then for the club to perhaps sink. There wouldn't have been a lot of sustainability at the forefront of that decision, or a lot of stability in mind when that was going on.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. One of the key things that they mentioned when they took over was that given they had lent money to the club, they'd been able to see sort of the inner workings of the club as well in order to get the collateral on the loan they were giving. And they saw it was in a horrendous state. So ultimately at that point, the fan base is sort of thinking, well, anything's better than this then. At least we've got new owners. And then when it came to, we sort of knew it was always going to be a very short-term deal with them. Ultimately, we're sat now, July 2025. It's been over 7 years. And one timing that I think is really relevant, but never really gets mentioned, especially in the national media, but never gets mentioned at a club level either, is the sale was completed a week before we had the game away at Coventry. And if we hadn't have got a point away at Coventry, we would have been relegated to the National League. And Coventry were going for the playoffs, and they won the playoffs that season. Barnet were at home to Chesterfield, and all they needed was to win and us to not get a point, and we would have gone down. And sort of how it transpired was us and Coventry both needed a point. So after a few early attacks, the game settled down and both teams took the 0-0, which Barnet fans still are very annoyed about, as you sort of see on social media. They still remember that 7 years on. But yeah, like, why would an owner come into the club and think it's about to lose its EFL status? We were odds on for relegation. No one expected us to stay up in that final game. Why would an owner come in and buy it then, of all times?
That's a really good point, actually. It's just really strange, and I'm guessing there wasn't a lot of transparency, or I suppose the word that I like to use often is there wasn't a roadmap that was given to fans of how this would be achieved. It was just a whole lot of, as has come to be discovered, hollow words and a lot of false promises.
Yeah, that's completely true. The most transparency we've ever heard is during COVID, when the Shrimps Trust were doing podcasts with various members of the club. And since then, they've been able to get on loads of players and everything like that. So it's really good. Jason Whittingham went on the podcast in April 2021. So this was already nearly 3 years after having said it was a 2-year ownership spell, which already raises red flags. And he said profit was forecasted. Bearing in mind this was during COVID as well, so you had the COVID grants. They weren't concerned where the next bit of money was coming from. They've got good plans to develop the non-football related income. But he did admit that they were absent owners, and they claimed that was a geographical issue. They claimed that at that point they'd bought Worcester Warriors. I believe that was 2019 when they took over Worcester, so actually after us. And they were claiming that was a much bigger opportunity for them and a lot better geographically for them. So they basically just left Morecambe to run autonomously. Ultimately, very soon after, as we've mentioned already, the BBC reporting Worcester had £25 million of debt in 2022 and went under. And that was less than a year after they went on the podcast saying, you know, that's not relevant to us. Morecambe's its own entity. Nothing's going to happen. Don't worry. We're developing things. And yeah, as we've discussed, obviously that's not happened.
Yes. So that kind of set everything up for the issues that you guys have currently faced. I mean, since then, as you mentioned, there's kind of been this slow burning decline of the club, which is such a shame. I mean, I know that there's been so much going on about the sale of the club for the last few months now, but I think when this was really brought to my attention personally was when there appeared to be some kind of internal board revolt, and then Jason Whittingham dismissed all other board members, which is, yeah, I mean, it's horrible. I mean, red flag doesn't even cut it. That's obviously a huge and a significant development in this ongoing saga between his ownership of the club and the struggle for fans to win it back.
Yeah, the board, to be honest, they've been very patient with Jason. They barely criticised him. Like James said, they put their own money into the club to keep it afloat at times. They're Morecambe fans at the end of the day. When you were saying about when they left, it was because it was when Jason, again, was delaying the sale. So they gave him an ultimatum to sell the club, and they said if he doesn't, then they'll start calling the administrators to put the club into administration. And a lot of fans were actually wanting that because it would mean that Jason is gone. And basically what happened after that is he said he was going to remove them all, and instead they all decided to walk. So they left. Which meant that the club had no directors on the board, which is a breach of the law, which Whittingham should be responsible for, as he's put the club in that situation. There was a rumour that apparently Jason was trying to put himself onto the board of directors, but wasn't able to do so because there was no current director to sign a document that meant that he would be a recognised director. I don't know how true that is, but that was the story that people were told. They then came back because Jason promised that he would be selling the club again and that he would sell it over the weekend. I think it was 2 weeks ago now. I could be wrong. It's all kind of merged into one. But again, Monday rolled around. Club was no closer to being sold. And so they walked again and said they would be on standby to sign the club over when it was needed to be. That's kind of the last proper update we've had, other than the most recent one, where Jason has said that there is a new buyer supposedly in the works.
The problem with that, though, is that he said that a new buyer was in the works, and if I remember correctly, again, 3 days ago, he said that documents would be signed and sealed the morning after. And here we are 3 days in advance and still nothing's been put out. And this is kind of the ongoing problem with him, is that he seems to be stalling for time, but the EFL are quite understandably very, very unhappy with how he's went about this.
Yeah, well, apparently, again, I'm not too sure how true it is, but the story that fans are being told is that the National League have now given us a deadline of next Friday. And if the club is not sold by next Friday, we will be removed from the National League next season. I mean, as it stands, we wouldn't be able to field a team. We went to Longridge Town for pre-season on last Tuesday, or the Tuesday just gone. We had 14 players on the team sheet, with 2 of the academy lads warming up alongside them, who we assume are coming back from injury. But even then, it's 16 players in a team that, in the National League, where it's a physical league, and a lot of the lads that were there are academy lads. They're not like necessarily built for that kind of football yet, so we wouldn't be able to compete. So I think the National League are well within their right to tell us we can't enter, because there is no end in sight to this.
It's really horrible. Like, just kind of hearing about this, no end in sight is quite a damning indictment. And I suppose that, well, the only end in sight at the moment is that if the deadline on Friday rolls around and nothing's been done, then the club will be forced to withdraw from the league. And I don't think anyone really wants to consider what happens after that, because it's certainly not going to be good and it's not going to be positive. But just from what you guys know, from who you've been speaking to, is there any indication that a sale has actually went through or a buyer is in place? Or do you think it is just a case of Jason Whittingham stalling for time?
There is nothing to suggest that anything's happening. No.
Incredibly troubling then. I mean, administration, the threat of has already been looming, and then it was obviously taken away. And then on July 4th, they said that a sale went through, and we're nearly 10 days on now and nothing seems to have happened. But I mean, as supporters, this must be absolutely horrible for you guys to see. I mean, I don't want to state the obvious, but no one wants to see this happen to their football club. I think the fact that this has been such a long, drawn-out saga has made it so much more traumatic and worse for you guys and so many people.
Yeah, you're spot on. And to put it into context, the board of directors resigning, coming back and resigning again, was all within the space of about a week. And that's where probably, as you said yourself, Rory, that's when it's kind of come to the public attention, because you're sort of thinking, well, how is a board of directors resigning against their own owner? Like, what's happening there? And that sort of drags you into the story. But quite honestly, the club's been up for sale ever since they took it over in 2018. They've always been willing to sell to the quote-unquote right buyer, but they've never done that. They've rejected big offers in the past, as we've been told by the Shrimps Trust, who are privy to more information and have been in conversations that they've tried to sort of help out with. And it was around September 2022, so this was at the start of our second season in League One. Given the context, we're now in National League, it's a very long time ago. And that was at the point where he went, the club's officially up for sale. And January 2023, we got a Daily Mail breaking news story saying this teenage tycoon businessman, Sarbjot Johal, was going to take over the club. He was going to beat Tyson Fury to the club, despite Tyson Fury never actually being in talks at all. That's
incredible.
That stalled for ages. And then we end up with Punjab Warriors midway through 2024, who had links to Sarbjot Johal. And then we get to the current day where they finally got EFL clearance, and yeah, they're told they could take over the club and no shares were transferred.
Incredible. I mean, it's an absolute farce at the end of the day. And I think, you know, obviously one of the underlying themes of what we always talk about on these types of conversations and episodes is that this is all being allowed to happen. And the only time that the EFL have really stepped in is to say, in this case, the National League has been to say, well, if you don't have the paperwork delivered to us by Friday, then the club will have to withdraw from the league. So it almost seems quite counterproductive that regulation is yet to be put in place. Proper regulation and proper monitoring has actually yet to take place for this, because if we did have something like that in place, then this would stop happening. Because at the moment, and, you know, to a degree, I can kind of understand some of the different angles and some of the different ways where the different league setups are coming from. But, I mean, again, it just seems crazy that they stand by and watch this happening, but then effectively deal the killing blow to football clubs. It just doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big problem with potentially being removed from the National League is that I think we'd struggle to find a Phoenix club or to create a Phoenix club as well. Like we were saying earlier, we know what we are and who we are. We're not a Bury that has a big fan base that can rally together. Like the Shrimps Trust, they do a good job. They work hard, but I just don't know if the cry for help that they would put out would be answered. There are a lot of fans that come to Morecambe because it is their local team and they do have an interest in other clubs. And I don't see a problem with that personally, because without those fans, then we will be back to 900 on a Tuesday night kind of thing. But it'd be so difficult with the location of Morecambe as well. It's difficult to bring in new fans, never mind keep the fans coming when there's no success. I think we'd even struggle to find a pitch if we weren't able to use the Mazuma, because there just isn't that kind of space. It's at the point where I feel like there's just no alternative to getting out of the situation that we're in, really.
It is a real shame as well, though. I mean, the deadline's obviously coming up, and hopefully there's going to be some news delivered within the next week, some actual news with substance that will effectively save the club. But I mean, like you said, Tom, let's not beat around the bush. If the club were to be forced to withdraw from the National League setup, then the club would likely go out of existence as it is right now. It's sad to hear that a Phoenix club wouldn't be formed. I mean, I'm obviously quite cautious about using comparisons, but do you not feel like an AFC Morecambe would be on the cards? Is that something that has already been discussed within different supporters groups? Because surely, other alternatives should be banded around at the moment just with how things are just now.
Yeah, on the fans page, there's lots of discussions about Phoenix Club. And like I said, the Shrimps, I imagine the Shrimps Trust would put something on. They would do their best to do it. I just think we'd really struggle to get out of second gear, really. I think the club, as it is, has got no funding. So where would the funding for a competitive Phoenix club be? I think we could compete in the Northwest Counties, no problem. But to try and get back to where we are now, it would take another 105 years, however long it's been since we were formed, to get back to that because of who we are and where we are. I mean, the actual town of Morecambe, there is potential with it because apparently we'll be getting the Eden Project North. But without that, it is just a small little seaside town that once you could start going abroad on holidays, it kind of started falling apart, really. There is no reason for investment in Morecambe as a town, never mind the actual football club itself as being just a part of Morecambe.
Yeah, I kind of understand what you mean, and I can kind of get where you're coming from. It's one of those places it's kind of semi-remote, reasonably detached from a lot of the other clubs around it to a certain degree. It's gotten to hear that another instance of rogue ownership has driven a club to this degree of, well, could they be facing complete extinction? We'll need to wait and see, but it sounds like that certainly is the case. I mean, just from what's happened over the last few months, when Jason Whittingham first came in, was there ever any kind of indication that this is the way that it would go? Has he got a track record for doing this kind of thing? Has he been involved in other companies, even out with football, where this type of thing has happened? Because it sounds like he's... I mean, the word con man's thrown around a lot, but I mean, it doesn't sound like he has been involved in many good business dealings in the past.
Yeah, you're spot on. And we couldn't really envisage how it would end, or quite as complex as it would end. I mean, there's nothing straightforward with the Morecambe story at the moment. It's all very convoluted. But I'll quote Kieran Maguire again, the finance expert. He dug into Jason Whittingham's businesses on Companies House. He's got 25 different company roles. 10 of those are dissolved. 2 of those are in receivership. 1's in liquidation and 1's in administration. So you can sort of form your own mind up as to how you believe he's doing as a businessman. He's a pawnbroker by trade, so he's a specialist in getting lending sorted, and kind of that's how we've stumbled across with his ownership and how it's sort of ending as well, with loads of sort of loans being dished out. Punjab Warriors, the prospective owners, for example, have put 3.8 million into the club. They've lent over $1 million in interest-free loans, if you believe what they're saying. And they're worried they're just not going to get that back. We could not have envisaged it ending in this way if this is the end, or the culmination of his ownership, perhaps on a positive. But right from the very start, and especially when he bought Worcester a year after buying us, and that went pear-shaped, you didn't need to be much of a cynic to sort of think that the same could happen to us.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Worcester ownership was the real red flag. My partner's dad lives about a 10-minute drive from the Worcester Warriors Stadium, so I've had a few conversations with him about it. And it's a derelict stadium now, and it's a huge ground, and they did a lot with the community there, and that just disappeared. He doesn't seem to care about who he's affecting when it comes to it. If Morecambe went under, there'd be so many people that they've got nothing to do on a weekend anymore. You know what I mean? You work your 9 to 5, or for some people they work even more difficult hours than that. And the one kind of release you have is that 90 minutes and the time surrounding the football on a Saturday. And I think for him to just be so ignorant to how his actions will actually affect other people, I think it's upsetting more than anything, because there are so many people that their outlet is Morecambe FC.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is one of the things that it often gets forgotten about when you're an outsider looking in and you're not actually involved in the club or a fan of it, or if you're not from the town, or, you know, if Morecambe FC isn't within your immediate kind of sphere of what you do on a day-to-day, then it's easy to forget that there's people here who are suffering through it as well. The people whose wages haven't been paid, the people who are facing the prospect of not having a football club to go to, the people who might use the Saturdays as a reason to get out of the house. It might be the only time they socialise with people. If they're an older fan, it might have the only place that they can actually go to see people that they know anymore. Like, these places are so important to our communities, especially communities like Morecambe, and the football clubs are an intrinsic part of how those communities work. And it's very, very easy to forget that when a football club is taken away, especially in this case where there's a prospect that there's maybe no hope on the horizon, there's a prospect that the football club could cease to exist altogether, it starts getting very, very scary, and the thought of not having a football club to support is something that a lot of people don't want to think about or even face, because let's be completely honest, a lot of us take for granted the fact that our football clubs are pretty stable, but all it can take is one bad owner to come in, and that, you know, that just doesn't become the case anymore, and people can really start worrying about what is going to be happening to the club. And this kind of leads us nicely onto the discussions that we've had about, you know, football identity and how the football club is an expression of people's identities and culture and things like this. It's like, these are the things that people forget, that is that when football clubs are taken away from us like this, then we lose a part of the identity of our places, of our towns, of ourselves. And that's how our heritage can end up becoming damaged and actually just wiped out. It's just becoming, unfortunately, all too common at the moment. That's me talking, obviously, but for you guys, what would happen with you guys if Morecambe ceased to exist next Friday and there's no prospect of the club coming back?
It would probably be a case of help. I mean, like I say, I assume that the Shrimps Trust would be the ones to try and put forward a Phoenix club. I guess it would be put as much as you can into that. I think there's not much else we can do. The fans are so, I was going to say passive, but that's not the word. It's out of our hands kind of thing. There's nothing we can do. It lies solely on Jason Whittingham just signing a dotted line. That's all it is. But I think if Morecambe ceased to exist, it would be a case of, let's get a Phoenix club going, and how can we actually try and make that a success? How can we try and replicate what we have done as such a small club again?
Yeah, I would echo the same things. I went to a lot of away trips last season, so I'd save my last couple of seasons especially, I've done a lot of them up and down the country, so it saved myself a lot of money. But you miss everything about it. You meet a lot of people through the football club until it's kind of taken away from you. And I think a lot of fans notice that during the summer. You get up in a random sort of like mid-June Saturday and you think, I'm not going to a football game. That would be every Saturday for us. Or people who only go to home games on the Saturdays where their club's away, they always talk about there being a void there and they sort of want to do something else. That'll be us every weekend. And for the community, it's far worse. I mean, for the staffs in particular, they still haven't received the full wages for June. That includes the players. So the players have now not been paid for 2 weeks, so they can just walk now, basically, with the PFA contracts. And for the community, they've really suffered. Especially recently with all the different primary schools and secondary schools, they're all having their proms and leavers parties at the stadium. But there's no staff to do that for them. So they've all had those parties cancelled at the last minute with all of this that's going on. And they've had to be accommodated elsewhere, if possible, by other sort of voluntary initiatives by other companies in the local community. And those schools aren't receiving the money for that. The NHS work out the club a lot with things like blood donations, and they were going to do that next week or the week after, and they can't do that. So until you realise, until you sort of think and break it all down, you don't quite realise how big it is in the community. And as Tom said about the Worcester Stadium, we can't have that Morecambe Stadium just sat empty when it's used every day for all of these community initiatives. It'd just be such sacrilege.
The big one as well is we have, I'm not sure if it's bi-weekly or monthly, but there's a veterans coffee group. And I think a lot of the people that go to that, obviously I've never been myself, but they're just old people that need to get out, and that is their release. It's a coffee in the club stadium on a weekend. And I think to lose, like James said, you lose the little things. It's the snowball effects. Like Morecambe FC used to put on the summer camps that I used to go to as a kid because my parents obviously both worked full time. They do things now with schools where they get players in and they get kids being active, and You don't get that at the big clubs. You wouldn't see players from like Manchester United, Manchester City going into a primary school to have a kickabout on a concrete playground with a bunch of kids, whereas Morecambe do that and they actively do it. And you see it all the time on socials where the players are interacting with the community. Like we used to have a centre mid called Tombs. You'd see him in Asbury every single weekend after a game. And it's the little things like that you see kids go up to him and it makes their day kind of thing. And I know that's only like a small example of things and a bit of a silly example, but it is the little things that I think would be missed the most.
I don't think it's a silly example at all, Tom. I think these things are really important. Like we kind of touched on at the beginning, these are the types of things that make a football club a community. For even a football stadium to host things like the school proms, that's an incredibly important thing for a lot of teenagers and for a lot of high schools as well. And that's what a community is at the end of the day. And that's how a football club plays its role within place and within communities. So from what you've said there, losing Morecambe would be devastating for the town and for the supporters.
Yeah, I think it's one of them that even the non-football fans would miss these things. Like you have weddings at the Mazuma, you have birthdays. It's used as a function room, like the board box. It's a community hub. We have like the chefs that make the pies for the Saturdays, and like we were saying before, the bar staff that do all the hospitality work. Never mind the playing staff and like the social media team and people like that they're going to be without a job. And unless you wanted to, so for like the physios, for example, unless you wanted to go back into the NHS, which I have friends that are physios and apparently that is the goal. It's get out of the NHS, and for a lot of the people I know, it's get into a sports club. And these people have worked so hard to get to that stage where they're representing a club that they're proud of and they're proud to be there, which is why they're working without pay. And one, they're going to have their jobs taken away. Two, they're going to have all the work that they've put in to get to that point just completely stripped for nothing.
100%. You're 100% right. And it's like these types of things that when people don't have them, is like we've said, you miss them the most. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just going to be so cataclysmic if Morecambe do fall out of existence. And has there been anything in the ways of, you know, solidarity from some of the other fan groups, some of the other clubs that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode? You know, just reading off the top of my head, there's been a few other clubs from England who've had recent situations like this. Southend, I think, as well. Has been any sort of communication between yourselves and those guys, or?
We had with the Swindon Town group who were doing a lot of protesting around their owners. They were really, really helpful with us because they've been actively protesting for longer than we were. They gave us ideas. They were always, always, always in the comments on social media wishing us well. And even more recently, we've had teams like Barrow, Accrington, Fleetwood, fans of them who they're typically our rivals, and you obviously get a few like jokey comments, but I'd say 99%, these people hate us. You know what I mean? Like on a Saturday, and they're wishing us well. They're wanting us to stay because the knock-on effect is for them that a game that they all look forward to is gone. There was a bloke at my work who he goes to Altrincham, and he said, "Oh, I can't wait to go to Morecambe next season because it's a nice day out when it's sunny." And it's like, well, you might not be able to, and like. You could tell, like, even that for him, as a fan of another club, it was like, oh, well, that's a good day out for me and my friends. It's memories that could be made that won't be made if we carry on the way that it's going.
Yeah, it's not nice. And I think I'd share the views of most of our listeners that we hope that Morecambe stays afloat. Obviously, I don't think anyone would want to see you fall out of existence completely, but unfortunately we're dealing with a very real prospect that could be happening. Now, obviously, we're recording this on the Sunday. It's going to be going out tomorrow/today. The episode will be released on Monday the 14th. And, you know, these things tend to move very quickly. We could have another statement tomorrow morning, but the hope is that in the future, you know, people will look back, they can take lessons from these different types of protests that have happened throughout English football in the last year or so, and actually use it to build something that protects our football clubs and by extension the heritage and the history of our football clubs as well. With the kind of things that we talk about here in terms of heritage, people often forget that, you know, you're losing the club badge, the club colours, you're losing the club history, the club trophies, whichever they've got. You know, all of these things are tied up in shared experiences, memories, the things that tie people to place identity, like we've already mentioned. Heritage is a huge part of what gets lost when a football club goes defunct. I mean, obviously, hoping for the best. Hopefully something comes out very soon that points to Morecambe being saved. What do you want to see from the future of the club in terms of a management and ownership perspective?
For me, it's just a bit of consistency. I've said it a few times already. We know what we are. I'd say we're a League Two team. It's almost impossible to get out of the National League now, but even just competing at the top end of the National League would be fantastic, because at the minute we don't even think that we'll be doing that. That's the main thing, consistency and a bit of pride. We'd like an owner that actually cares, because the last two owners we've had, Lemos and Whittingham, they've just been so absent. They don't care about the club. They don't care about the community. They're just there to make a bit of money and say they own a football club from the looks of things. So that's the big thing for me. I'm not bothered about winning titles. I just want consistency. I'd like to have a club that I'm proud to say that I'm a supporter of.
Yeah, and specifically on the ownership front, we've got a ready-made owner who has been wanting to buy the club, who has put in nearly £6 million, if you believe what they've said, and they haven't received any of that back in Punjab Warriors. Ultimately, if Jason Whittingham sells the club to the deals that he's agreed with many times, it was agreed on Monday the 7th of July, so now nearly a week ago, that everything was finalised. We've got an owner there ready to step in, and despite all of the issues that has happened over the last few years, they've stuck by it, and they still want to take over the club and not lose all of their money. Specifically, that is what has got to happen. Jason Whittingham has got to sell this football club. You know, he said there's a new buyer that has come in, but we haven't heard any evidence of that. The trust got in contact with the National League, and the National League say they aren't aware of a new buyer. So yeah, specifically what we need with a new owner is to sell it to Punjab Warriors. And ultimately, we've done our own research into Punjab Warriors. We don't know where the money's coming from with them either. So, you know, we could just be moving from one bad ownership situation to another. But, you know, if the club exists, that is what we require. The difficulty with Morecambe, you've mentioned it both yourselves, is we are out on a limb. We're not quite as bad as Carlisle and Barrow in terms of as north as they are. But you look at clubs like Macclesfield, obviously Bury's a bigger club. Look at clubs like Macclesfield. They've had Robbie Savage helping them. You know, we wouldn't have any of that to get back as a new club. And you look when Aldershot refounded in the 90s, they've just got 18,000 people to Wembley for the FA Trophy final. You know, these other clubs, they may not have a match day fan base bigger than us. We might actually have more season ticket holders and things like that. But it's the sort of people, the investors that we don't have, and what would make a Phoenix club very hard to reform. We just need Jason Whittingham to sell the club and to finally stick to his promises. But sadly, it's now 4 days without communication from him. We've had 14 club statements without any other club news. It's just been statements. We've now heard radio silence from Jason Whittingham. So, yeah, we were just calling him to sell to the buyers he agreed with last week.
Yeah, and I think, you know, from the beginning, 14 statements is absolutely incredible. Fair play to you for counting them up. But these are the things that you do when your club is facing such an existential crisis. I mean, there's a real threat. And I think, you know, we want to kind of drill this home. There is a real threat that by this time next week, Morecambe won't exist. We really hope that something gets done, but that when this new ownership group come in, they can actually give you guys something that looks and resembles like a sustainable plan for the club, to bring them back where to you guys want to be in terms of being a sustainable football club, but also to just, you know, let you guys have a bit of pride in being Morecambe fans again. I think that's the most important thing. Is there anything else that you guys want to add just before we finish up for today?
For anybody that is listening, have a word with people around you about the teams that are struggling. I work in Manchester and I live in Manchester, but I speak to people and they have no idea what's happening outside of like the clubs that they support. Just have that conversation. Say, oh, have you heard about Morecambe? Have you heard about Swindon? Have you heard about, you know, because what we don't want is another Sky Sports special with a countdown clock for any football team like they had with Bury. That would be the one thing. It's almost a plea for help, but we just want to spread the word as much as possible about the whole situation. There's a guy on Twitter, and I think he uses BlueSky mostly now. He's called The Ugly Game, and he did a huge breakdown, Jason Whittingham and Punjab Warriors, and even that, it was one of those damning stories that I've ever seen about a football club. And it just hasn't really taken off outside of the Morecambe social sphere.
Yeah, I'd echo the same. That account called The Ugly Game is Martin Calladine, and I've had a lot of conversations over the last few years with him, tending to be more about prospective buyers and how dodgy they sort of seem, and we don't know where the funding is coming from. But more recently it's turned to, well, we're actually not selling the club to anyone. So you've got to point the finger elsewhere now. He wrote a great book called Fit and Proper People. He's a very accomplished sports writer, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that he has said to me on multiple occasions privately, where basically he is so frustrated with the lack of coverage in the national media, in Sky Sports, BBC, everything. Sky have put out very few news stories about us. And when we got the recent statement basically saying, Jason Whittingham saying that the club's going to be sold, it's fine, we've agreed everything, they finally jumped on that and went, oh, it's sold, it's all good. But they never report what happens after that, the constant lies. So you sort of wonder what they're gaining from that, and obviously you can be a cynic about that. Yeah, as Tom said, we just need coverage of it. When you speak to people in public, when you speak to people on the internet, the common thing is like, well, what went wrong? You got sold last month. And that's because the sort of mainstream big media outlets just report the very sort of on the surface level sale matters, but they never bother to go with it with any critical thinking and think, well, this guy's not held up his promises for however many years now. Is this going to be another false promise, which it inevitably turns out to be? We are in no uncertain terms, is the club sold? And that's really important to tell everyone,
100% agree with you, and I hope that this podcast goes a little way to helping people find out a little bit more about the story and, get in touch, maybe help you guys in the future, however that may look. Obviously, we wish you all the best of luck, as hopefully all of our listeners do as well. Huge week ahead for Morecambe FC and the fan base, so let's hope a resolution can be made. But thank you very much for both coming on and talking to us about this. I know it's very difficult. We're talking about the possible death of a football club. It's not something that's very fun, but I hope that in some ways it's a little bit cathartic to get everything off your chest and actually speak about it a little bit more. Of course, thank you very much to all of our listeners for tuning in once again. If there's anything that you want us to cover, you can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk as well. Please do get in touch if you have any questions about this episode as well. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave us a review. It does wonders for the algorithm and helps us get in front of new listeners as well. But for now, Tom, say goodbye.
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.
James, say goodbye.
Goodbye.
It's been a pleasure having both you guys on. Thanks very much for joining me. It's goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.